Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for this special conversation part of SAC's Part Freedom Summer. Today, 2 weeks after Juneteenth, a day that reminded us that freedom in this country has always been delayed for some and denied to others. We are reminded that we are once again at a moment where the promise of justice is on the line. Today, House members in DC are deciding how to vote on a reconciliation package that was rushed through the Senate. In this single vote, the lives of more than 17 million people hang in the balance. People who may lose access to the health care that keeps them alive, that keeps them stable, and that keeps them thriving. And it's not just our health that's at risk. Our representatives are putting the nation's future at risk by growing the debt by over $3 trillion, all while threatening to gut Medicaid and other programs that serve the people who need them the most. But we've been here before. As a people, and especially in the South, we've lived through moments where the odds seemed impossible, where the threats felt too big to beat back, and every single time, intersectional, community-led work got us through. We remember the Freedom Summer of 1964, when Black communities and allies across Mississippi risked everything to register voters, to teach, and to organize for change. We remember the Poor People's Campaign of 1968, which brought together Black, white, Latina, Indigenous people, all demanding economic justice side by side. We remember the farm workers movement, the HIV activists who refused to be ignored, and the everyday people who turned pain into power. This is what we carry forward, the understanding that freedom, dignity, and health justice are never given. They're won together, across movements, across communities. So in this special webinar, you'll hear from 3 people whose lives and work embody this truth. Their stories remind us that we've faced dark times before, and that we have everything we need right now to push through this moment as well. So thank you for being here, for listening, and for stepping into this season with us, ready to fight for what our people deserve. And that's freedom, that's justice, and that's health for all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here, Miguel. My name is Roberto Lopez, Beyond Borders Senior Advocacy Manager at the Texas Civil Rights Project based out of Austin. My journey into this advocacy work has been a bit long and winding. I initially started off as an engineering student. I graduated with my engineering degree, decided to become a math teacher in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, where I'm from. And as I, lived and grew up in the border, I've seen border militarization, border walls, checkpoints, border technology just grow year after year, while our infrastructure remains unaddressed, while local health needs remain unaddressed, while people have suppressed wages. All of these different things have happened over the years, and I've wanted to take part and wanted to give back to my community and try to figure out ways to advocate and make sure that we have a brighter future ahead of us. So in 2018, I started working full time at the Texas Civil Rights Project, and the majority of my work is around immigration and border militarization issues. And of course, that spans out into a lot of different ways in which our community is affected by immigration policies, by bad immigration policies. But really, it all goes back to, our communities along the border in South Texas, really across the nation, just needing so much more than the heavy-handed approach to criminalize people on all different types of issues that we've seen over the last few decades. So what brought me here is just a big drive to give back to my home in South Texas and to fight for a better future that doesn't just rely on jailing people into oblivion. Yeah, and if you don't know about us, we've been around since 1990. We work not only in immigration and border issues, but also in voting rights, criminal justice. We're largely a law firm. We have a lot of attorneys who do that really great work, legal work in the courts, because as organizers, advocates need attorneys. They need to advocate in those spaces. So that's a large share of our work. And we also have an advocacy and policy team, and that's the work, a lot of the work that I get to do too. So we do quite a few different things. We've been around for a minute. You should check us out and look us up if you can. And I'm also really grateful for you too, Miguel, and for this space to be able to just have a little bit of a conversation on the different ways in which our work intersects and the little that I've been able to learn and glean from watching some really amazing labor folks and from my perspective in the immigrant and border space. Oficina Legal del Pueblo Unido is our official name. We see ourselves as an entity that works hand in hand with organizers. We come from the farm workers movement in 70s, 60s, and 70s here in Texas. We grew out and alongside La Oficina del Pueblo Entero, La Unión del Pueblo Entero, Lupe, in the Rio Grande Valley, who started off as farm working organizers and led to addressing a myriad of organizing needs in colonias, in neighborhoods that desperately need help in their infrastructure and their healthcare along the South Texas border. And that legacy of fighting for change and demanding dignity in the fields over the decades in South Texas has grown into demanding dignity in our healthcare, in our workplace, in our as we welcome people into our communities and take care of longtime immigrants and our immigrant families. So it's said that in 1966, when the melon strike in Stark County in South Texas hit, it was a milestone moment in civil rights organizing for South Texas, and that has continued to echo and resonate throughout the years. Our organization finds its roots in the farm workers movement, and we've grown as a legal entity to provide support to organizations and organizers who need that help in South Texas and across the state of Texas. So the legacy of Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers movement really has spun off in all these different organizations and efforts fighting for dignity in Texas and across the country. I live in Austin today, but I spent most of my life in the Rio Grande Valley and watching La Unión del Pueblo Entero Lupe organize and put together marches and rely on its history, fighting for farm workers' rights. That informs a lot of my approach today. Um, Labor is so much a part of what has pushed for better, for just organizing and social change that we see today in our country. Everyone is a lot of people across the country work. A lot of people are have so much at stake, and there's a really big with respect to their work, and a lot of there's a really big question of how you activate people, how you move people to fight for dignity and justice in our state, and um, one way to do that is to find people's self-interest, find the things that directly affect their day to day. And so often it is working conditions. People want to have fair wages. People deserve to be treated fairly and equitably at work and not have their wages stolen from them. So one of the things I'm really proud of with respect to the Texas Civil Rights Project's legacy is that right before I started here, we had really large wage theft campaigns and worked alongside organizers in South Texas to make sure that farm workers, that workers across different sectors were actually paid by their employers. There's laws that apply regardless of your immigration status, for example. Like no matter what, people deserve to get paid for the work that they do, no matter where they come from, no matter what kind of status they have. And so, seeing how the labor movement like really fights for a world without borders, where we just focus on people's humanity, on the things that people deserve because they're people, to show up to a workplace without racism, without hatred, without fear, to be your whole person's taken care of, to fight for a world where people get to rest and get the healthcare that they need. Those things I think are common and in the immigrant rights movement, as well as in a movement for a world without border militarization, in a world where we welcome people. We should welcome everybody because every human being deserves dignity. And I think that is what I've seen in the United Farm and other labor organizing spaces that help inform the stuff that we do in the immigrant rights movement. Yes, I would say like we really need to be cautious whenever we draw borders. And like drawing a border can look like focusing exclusively on a certain issue to the detriment of learning about other issues, to the detriment of helping other people in other issues, because everything is so intertwined and so connected to each other that the moment you start to separate things and pull it apart, it leaves advocacy open to othering people. It leaves the opportunity open to othering people, setting aside people, not
Mhm.
taking into account certain issues or concerns. Um, I think one thing that I think a lot about is when it comes to borders, and like how people are going to migrate, whether or not it's like the most human experience that we've done for millennia and we will do for millennia. And it's not a question of like whether or not we're going to have migration. It's just what kind of policy are we going to have around it. And sometimes, too, when we say things like getting rid of a whole current system, we also need to have a plan for making sure people have jobs and people get uh, paid and taken care of too. And we can't call for we got to have a plan, I guess. And in order to have a plan for a world without borders, for a world without jails, for a world where everyone is um, taken care of, we need to make sure that we're considering all of these different factors. So I think, yeah, the moment we separate um, one group of people from another, we start to lose out on the attention and the care that everybody deserves, that every human deserves. I have a few things that I think about. Over the years, I've met some really wonderful. I see young people. I'm seeing more and more young people coming into this work. There's organizations across Texas, but across the country that really focus on bringing in the youth and bringing in college students and people who want to take action, want to do something, want to learn more about this. When I was a high school student, I just didn't know a lot about my South Texas history, and I didn't know about advocacy and organizing like I do now. And I see that changing with high school students getting involved with like Lupe or other organizations that we work with. Um, we have college student interns here in our office, which is awesome. I think having another generation of leaders like seeing and talking to young people really gives me hope. And then maybe as an additional fun thing, I started watercoloring after the pandemic began, and that has also like given me just a deeper appreciation for art. I
Mhm.
work along different parts of the South Texas border, and there are incredible artists from like in every single border community. And that artwork gives me hope because it means that we still have time and space and like soul to be able to sit down and like paint, like turn nothing into something and paint and throw it on a canvas or throw it together in a collage or do something that's creative and fun. And it tells me like, okay, we can still do this. We can still challenge a gray world and push forward some color.
I am originally from Huntsville, Alabama. Um, I am the son of uh, Dave McGlathery, who integrated the University of Alabama in Huntsville the day after Medgar Evers was assassinated. That context is important because I was kind of born into a movement that I didn't select, but I always felt like it was a part of me. Um, Huntsville is different in the South than most places in the South because most of the professionals there are engineers, and so I became an engineer. Um, Huntsville also had a different path in segregation than most Southern states because the federal government's presence mandated that the city moved faster with integration than the rest of the state would have. And so there were tensions, but they were handled very politely. And so one of the things that happened with integration with school systems is that there were these academies that were formed. And so if a citizen didn't want their children to go to an integrated school, they would send their kids to an academy. And the name of my academy was Madison Academy. And so, unbeknownst to us, my brother and I integrated Madison Academy in 1970 and 1974. And that matters. And so I've kind of always been in movement. I've always been having to kind of having to kind of contrast what I was experiencing professionally or in the social setting versus who I knew myself to be and how I was taught and raised at home. Because my dad was an engineer and I was born into an engineering town, the presumption would be that all of us would be engineers. I was the only one that took my dad up on that offer. And so I ended up at Auburn, which was the other side of the state. And so at Auburn, I'm now in a very Alabama town, and I'm seeing this power dynamic that there are people in the state who don't think that the sky's the limit and that they can kind of dream a thing and be a thing. And so as I was preparing to enter the workforce, I was active in my church at the time, and I started talking to people about really feeling like engineering wasn't going to serve me. And so I was thinking about going to law school. And so one of my church members said, well, a friend of ours is the assistant U.S. Attorney in Montgomery. Let's go hang out with him and ask some questions. I think he went to Howard. And so we're sitting out on the porch. He's grilling and introducing me or learning about me and telling me about Howard. And I learned that Howard is a social justice and social engineering capital. And everything that happened through the civil rights movement largely came from leadership from Howard University. And so it seems like this university's identity is exactly the place I need to go to kind of understand the privilege that I was born into but couldn't appreciate. I, of course, fell in love with constitutional law at Howard University, and the 14th Amendment became my favorite piece. Equal protection, due process, which if you knew where I was born and who my family was, this would have all made sense, but no one there did. And the other thing that was really interesting, I wasn't prepared, wasn't thinking that I would share this, but I'll say in constitutional law, I had a South African professor who began to explain to me what the paperback test was. And the paperback test was you could not go to graduate school or you could not participate in the professional class in the United States if your complexion was darker than a paper bag. And so I had never heard of this before. So I'm at Howard University, this bastion of social justice and engineering. My constitutional law professor is South African, and they're just getting out of this whole apartheid thing. And he's basically telling me, as I'm asking him questions about constitutional law, I probably should keep my questions to a minimum and be glad that I'm even in the room, because a few years ago, I would not have even been admitted. And so this moment shapes every other experience and thought I've ever had since. I then took it upon myself. I felt like I needed to represent, even at Howard, I needed to represent a level of critical thought, a level of excellence, a level of conflict preparation. And I needed to perform in a way that quieted all people like my professor and all anyone around me who thought I didn't deserve to be there. So every competition, every opportunity I competed in, and I won. I became the editor-in-chief of the Law Journal. I became the captain of the moot court team. I was president of my class. I did all of these things, not because I wanted to be any of these things, but because there was a notion that I couldn't. And so that was my motivation for doing all this stuff. And so that motivation kind of propelled me all the way to New York, to representing police officers in civil rights cases, because I wanted to become intimately aware of what this constitutional law possibility could be. I went from DC to New York, as I said, and then ended up moving to Boston and would have stayed there until my dad got sick in 2007. I began kind of making preparations to be back in the South. And so it just so happens that by the time I'm getting back into the state, Alabama is about to start modernizing their HIV criminalization laws. And so Cyril Project decides to have their second HIV is not a crime conference in Huntsville. And so it just so happens, right? And that's why you have to appreciate the circle, right? Because it's just like, what are the odds? What were the odds? And so I get recruited into this conversation, and they start talking about going to Montgomery, going to DC to talk about how important it is for health equity to be present, even in HIV healthcare. And so I kind of find this way to where I feel like the bridge is completing, and this circle to move from social justice to social engineering back to the community, it all completes. And it completes in my hometown. And I'm only there because I'm taking care of my father, who was the original impetus for me investigating all these concepts and possibilities in the very first place. It it's pretty amazing how that circle completes. I have to learn how, and this was tough for me, and that's why I think the conversation with my professor in constitutional law was a bigger deal than I thought it was. Because what he was asking me to do is choose to be grateful for the privilege that he was affording me, right? Keep my mouth shut, right? Allow what he dictates to be enough for me and go the path of least resistance. So it was a major fork in the road. And I feel like part of the similarities between that movement, the civil rights movement, and the HIV movement that we're in now is all around identity and being able to always be your full self, regardless of whatever restrictions or parameters are placed around you by the authority of the moment, regardless of what complexion, regardless of what you share, regardless of what's different about you. It's like you have to always be fully you because no one else will ever be fully you in that moment but you. You know what I mean? And I think some of what the civil rights movement has been about is by minimizing your, giving you the challenge, giving you the offer to minimize your power and your presence and to trade your value for some symbol, for some trinket, for some idea. And I was surprised at how in a lot of those conversations, even though I'm in a room full of Black students, I'm the only one out of 75 making these cases. The rest of my 74 Black colleagues are like, will you shut up so we can move to the next topic on the agenda? and so I'd always thought until that moment that if I could ever get in a room full of Black people, we'd knock this thing out in a minute. And that's not true. Individuals are human and humans are corruptible. And no matter where those humans will be found, the corruption will always flow and follow. So we all have to be vigilant with all of our identities and all of our intersections and bring them all into the room at every given moment. This is a character shaping event. So I've never thought about it that way. And it makes me excited to see those similarities. Because I was matriculated at Howard and so many of my colleagues were also Black, I think at an earlier generation, I would have not been in the minority. If I had sat in that room 30 years prior, I think I would have been in the vast majority. I think the advances of the movement made it so that you could arrive to that place, you could come to advocacy without a personal conviction. It doesn't, you could separate yourself from the work. And in law, we call those mercenaries or hired guns. And one of the things you learn how to do in law school is you learn how to represent opinions, clients, perspectives that you don't agree with. That is the training. That's what you go to law school for. And so the capability is always there. I think the difference is over time, you can now become very successful and make a lot of money by trading on your interest and really kind of holding your nose and going in places and rooms where you actually can't stand the conversation. So I feel like with the progress, we have to change our litmus test and our criteria for who it is we will trust with our advocacy and be willing to embrace people who have traveled differently or identify differently as long as their convictions match with ours. I think during the civil rights movement, and as I mentioned, that if I had been in that room 30 years prior, Black advocates, I'll say, Black lawyers similarly situated to myself would have been much more comfortable identifying down identifying with what might be called the least common or most common denominator. And I think that was why the movement was so successful. You had people across a spectrum not trying to pull up, but pull down, and have the people who were at the top of the pyramid weren't trying to get people at the bottom of the pyramid, whether that's socioeconomic or something else. They weren't trying to get the people at the bottom to aspire up and to make sure everything in their life was about trying to get to this smaller and smaller category. It was the other way. It was trying to remind people at the top of the pyramid how much of their identity and core being resided at the base, and being comfortable and not needing to be extraordinary or better or superior, being comfortable in the base of the identity. And I think that was one of the most powerful things before. And I think part of the reason why that was easier then than it is now is because the movement was centrally located in a base institution, the Black church, which had no socioeconomic or educational criteria. Even the pastors of the churches, they were not seminary educated. They hadn't gone to graduate school. They hadn't studied. They didn't have MDivs. They weren't doctors of philosophy or doctors of theology, right? They hadn't studied ancient Near East theology. So in order for them to even represent what that institution was on a daily basis, they had to identify down. They had to talk to everyone on the same level. And so there was this regular practice and participation of this community identifying down as opposed to up. I think the problem now, we're thinking in the reverse. And so even on the conversations we're having about healthcare and access, it's all tied to employment and income. And in this country, largely, we're very comfortable. If you don't get a thing because you can't afford a thing, we kind of shrug our shoulders and says, well, you had the same opportunity to go to an academy that I did. The engineering school that I went to, they accepted students from your neighborhood. If you'd wanted to be in the professional class, you could have gone to Howard. You could have taken out those loans, right? And so in this country, we almost pride ourselves on this pulling yourself up from your bootstrap narrative, right? And we kind of secretly resent the fact that we are, as a society, burdened with this lower class of people who just seem to be dead weight on our ship. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we just pushed them off? Right? We don't say those things out loud, but how we navigate our spaces screams that in almost every conversation. And so I feel like, to your previous point, we have to locate our value in our humanity, not in our scholarship, not in our professionalism, not in our vocabulary, not in our degrees. It has to be located in our humanity, because that's the one thing we all have in common. It can't even be located, in my opinion, it shouldn't even be located in our citizenship, right? But we are comfortable identifying up instead of down. And I feel like that's where our peril begins and ends. Well, I think we have to be honest about the past, and the path, right? I think we have to tell the story. that was one of those slips that actually was prophetic. We have to tell the story of where we were and how we got here, and what, if any, shortcuts we took. And a lot of those will be racist. A lot of those will be nationalist. Right, there's all kinds of things that we're not ashamed of that got us into the room, and I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that we have to identify a common history that talks about all of the ugly parts of how we got here, and that's uncomfortable. But I don't think you can skip that step. A lot of times, just like it's really interesting to me how some people come into an HIV movement which largely burdens Black and brown bodies. And they try to start the advocacy with fixing this HIV-ness of the problem. When if you could somehow miraculously or magically take HIV out, if it could disappear tomorrow, if there was a price you could pay or a pill you could take or a world you could enter, that would not change the status of Black and brown people in this country. So if you're going to purport to be an advocate addressing HIV in Black and brown bodies, you have to know the story of Black and brown people and agree that there's injustice prior to HIV. Otherwise, whatever you do from that point on won't even make sense. And I think that's a big part of the problem. Another big part of the problem now is we've siloed HIV advocacy off as its own thing that doesn't connect to all of the other identities. And I think part of the reason why we can do that is because a lot of times the advocates themselves don't identify with their histories and don't see themselves as part of that whole, as we were just talking about a moment ago. They see themselves as these kind of exceptions to the rule who've earned the right to be at the top of the pyramid. And so we suffer, we spend time, and they used to call it, in New York, they used to call it slumming, right? If you want to hang out on a Friday night in New York, right, and you're on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side, and you've got, everything taken care of, you get bored with it after a while. And so you kind of say, well, let's have some fun tonight. Let's go downtown, right? It's thousands of songs about this. And I feel like a lot of our advocates are slumming in HIV advocacy. We're not in it. We're enjoying the trauma as voyeurs and kind of reminiscing about, oh, wouldn't it be bad if this were our life? And then at the end of the night, just like you did in New York, you get in your car, you get in your cab, you get in your mansion, you get in your house, you get in your neighborhood, and you're back home. And you don't think about them anymore until the next time you want to go downtown. Yeah, so I'll take a stab at this. I think the first thing is HIV care has to be seen as part of healthcare. It can't be its own thing. And I think historically it has been its own thing because of all of the stigma, discrimination, and all of the misconceptions from the 80s and the way the world's politics was at that time. So I'm not sure that we could go back and take a different path to get to a different place. But I think at this point, with the level of science and technology and treatments that we have, HIV care should just be a part of a larger healthcare. We shouldn't have to have a separate space to just talk about HIV care. There shouldn't have to be a separate line item just for HIV care. We know that it is now, and it has to continue because of the path. But where we need to be heading toward is the time where it's just part and parcel of how we take care of ourselves. I think the other piece has to do with almost the exact opposite. You have to reconcile the history of the inequity that created the possibility for HIV to become the epidemic that it has, right? And so all of the systemic challenges of HIV have historical sources that predate HIV. So there has to be part of the HIV suite of advocacy that includes things not related to healthcare as clinical practice. I would say clinical healthcare, like housing, right? Like food security, right? These basic, what I would call human rights access issues. And I'm not sure that there is a funding stream or a identity stream that makes sense that doesn't have some type of HIV title or equivalent title, because it has to be justified, right, by people who haven't been paying attention. So I've almost kind of contradicted myself with the second part of the first statement. On the one hand, it has to be part and parcel clinically from the medical side and perspective. Every provider should be equipped and should be trained and should be able to provide HIV care to any person who walks through the door who needs it. And at the same time, there is an effect. There's a population in the country who are living with HIV, who are vulnerable to HIV, who have challenges that are much larger than healthcare. And those things have to be addressed as part of HIV policy, right? Those are two huge and contradictory, apparently on their face, contradictory things. And I think another big piece of it has to do with workforce. And maybe that's kind of the balance in the middle of those two streams. You have to have a workforce. You have to have provider class, you have to have advocates, you have to have care professionals in the middle of those two paradigms that we just spoke about, who can translate and support clients moving to and through. And this administration that we're in right now is threatening that workforce in a way that I think we haven't fully accounted for by its pursuit of its anti-DEI and anti-LGBTQ agenda. And so we have to have a group of people who get it on both sides. Largely, that means they're going to have shared a lot of those same experiences of the population that we're speaking of. But there are so many systemic barriers between where they grew up, where they start, and them becoming part of this group, to this class. How are they going to get there without some type of program at these institutions that's going to identify them, train them, and put them in the position to make this all work? I don't know what you want to call it, or we may decide to call it something different, but the idea, the spirit of the DEI initiatives and the LGBTQ initiatives, they have to remain. And I think one of the great things that could be done in a moment like this is just to figure out, what do we need to call it for it to make sense? How do we need to write the history of it and the need for it and explain it for people who have these prejudices and biases that get in the way? I think there's progress that can be done, but you got to call it something. It's got to be something. Something has to be there, because we know from all of our research that until this class arrives in full, we're not going to end the epidemic, and our situation is not only not going to get better, it's going to get significantly worse. I would say it starts with education, and usually we talk about advocates educating the community. I think in this regard, it needs to go the other way. And I think you almost need to practice your ideas on people who haven't gone to the schools that you've gone to, and just wherever you are, at a barbershop, at church, at a store, waiting in an airport terminal. Talk to people about what their perceptions and ideas around the civil rights movement are, and why they feel the way that they do. Try it out. Have conversations with people outside of your silo, and talk to people who don't agree with your politics. Find out what they believe and why. I think part of the challenge of this particular moment is there is this dismissive nature for anyone who doesn't already agree with you. And this happens on both sides of the spectrum. And we tend to point that finger more toward conservatives and progressives, but I actually think progressives may be worse at this than conservatives. And when I was a part of the academy, they were always recruiting. It was always like, oh, you don't know yet, but if after I get through talking, you're gonna get it, right? Progressives don't seem to be recruiting. Progressives seem to be perfectly content to be the only person in their family who is as smart as they are, or who loves as hard as they love, or who digs as deep, or who sacrifices as much. And a lot of times we pride ourselves and we form our identity and our value is in how much we die daily for our cause, right? Instead of asking ourselves, is this a choice I'm making? Do I have to die daily in order to care? Are there other more pragmatic ways to be me in these situations or to represent my perspective in a conversation such that I can share my idea or learn from someone else how they got to where they are without dismissing them out of hand because they don't agree with me? So I would say if you're a medical student, talk to people who don't know anything about medicine, but talk to them about something that you discussed in class, something that just came up, something that you're terribly excited about starting. Other people are going to feel differently, but they've got reasons why they feel differently. Find out what those things are and bring that into your paradigm. I think there's been this history, and I talked about it earlier. We love to silo ourselves off. We love to become big fish in smaller pond, and I think we would be much better served by being much smaller fish in a much larger pond.
You bring up something that um, is so important to really level set and kind of ground us because New York City, during the height of the epidemic, and I always hate saying that because to me, throughout, it is still the height of the epidemic. People are still acquiring and also not getting the access to the best services out there. So I always saying the height because throughout, anytime anybody is impacted, we are all impacted. But during the 90s, where HIV was so prevalent in New York City and San Francisco, and other huge major metropolitan cities, the mood in New York was so dark. It was just a very somber time, a very sad time because people were passing so suddenly, so quick. Um, I know that my mother, who succumbed to the illness due to complications in September of '93, um, it took her within 18 months. You know, the medicines were there. There was support, but there wasn't wraparound services. There wasn't comprehensive services. There was more of a like, oh my God, this is what's happening. How do we best serve? And more importantly, there was um, no way to improve the quality of life. It was more or less just trying to figure out what to do with this life. So that was tough, as you can imagine, for someone that's carried you for 9 months and suddenly to see them wilt away from a vibrant, wonderful woman to someone struggling to live and take 16 pills every single day. It was tough. It was very tough because ultimately everyone that was impacted just knew the same result was for everyone. Very sad, meat times to the end. And most importantly, a very just wickedness of people not understanding the complexity of what's going on. So there was many things going on, and there was no way to truly help because there was so many storms brewing at the same time. As someone that has worked nationally, locally, on stigma on many different aspects, I've been very, very fortunate to lead program and be a part of program to address stigma head on. While stigma of yesteryears, I am glad to report, in my opinion, it has advanced to the levels where there are billboards, there's more acceptance, there's more awareness, there's just more speaking. Will we eradicate it? I believe so. I'm an optimist by nature, but I also think that a lot of things that happen are people centered, and as you can imagine, people hurt people. You know, hurt people hurt people. So within that respect, a lot of times I have just learned and gleaned from that. A lot of times people truly don't know, and most of the times we are not wise or just say a very ignorant or disrespectful thought because we don't know. And within that, to me, is always an education moment. And while it may hurt, it may inflict pain, and be like, no, that is wrong. It's an opportunity to shift that gear and say, hey, blank is wrong. let me give you another lens. Let me give you another opportunity to learn. Because I think in Earth, everyone wants to do well by the other person. I mean, we all quintessential want to follow the golden rule. But how does that reflect? How does that show in public health? It just shows up in just understanding the complexities, but also just understanding that stigmatizing may be anything that someone doesn't feel good and right about. So when we really just drill down, just understanding the complexity that if you don't shift and pivot, that when someone stigmatizes you or don't feel good, and not using it as an education moment, you're missing a mark to really move the middle feeling. It was just saying, hey, didn't feel good. Let me shift and what have you. Because too many times we'll talk about it after and says, hey, I went to blank, bad experience, and we didn't do anything to kind of level set and says, hey, what can we do different to that it doesn't happen to the next person, what have you. So I'm just glad the stigma has advanced to the levels where people are openly talking about it. Testing is way more accessible. People, it is on entertainment. It is not front page news if someone is HIV positive. There are many, many, many advances that I think that should be really shouted from the top of the windows, because in the 90s, that wasn't it so. And we didn't have that. And I think many times when we see those successes, we see them and they are like, oh, well, duh. Well, it took a long time to get to that level where people are engaged and people are a little more forthright in understanding the complexities of HIV. Well, we've seen tremendous progress. Biomedical progress has been revolutionary. You know, when PrEP came out in 2012, it was a game changer. It really said, hey, we can attack this from two different angles. We can get individuals that are HIV negative, suppress the virus. And when they were HIV positive, we can also suppress, block the virus for HIV negative and suppress the virus for individuals that are HIV positive. Within that respect, there was a huge shift. And New York was a huge catalyst of saying, hey, we have a way in and we have a way to tackle it. And I think with that biomedical advance, really just shifted the game, because it wasn't all on just one person. It was everyone collectively can come together and work towards the end regard of no new HIV infections. Because if you're negative, you can block, and if you're positive, you can suppress. And we all know that if it's suppressed, you can't transmit. So there was two different really earth-shattering medical advances that says, hey, we are here, we're going to move forward. One will often wonder, hey, well, why is there still a threat? Why is there still new? Well, there are many challenges that remain, including just understanding the complexity of sex positivity and understanding the complexity that it is a person's right to however they govern themselves accordingly with sex, and understanding the many complexities of rural health and city health. So while I applaud the many biomedical advances and just understanding of what we need to do collectively to advance the epidemic, I also want to be very conscious of those small little pockets that we are struggling. And not everyone is testing, not everyone is aware. So I think that we are still marching the good fight, and we are seeing progress every year, what have you. Even with limitations within state, local, and federal guidelines, we are still pushing forward because we're here and we are talking about it. And I think that is something that we rarely shout. We are still here, we're still talking about it, and we're giving this good fight. And that right there should always be discussed. You know, each state, I have been a Southerner for over a decade. Each state has different beautiful blessings within it, and understanding that what may work here in my city may not work literally in the next Southern state or even within the state I am. So that's important to note that even within each Southern state, there's different situations. And I'll use my state as an example. I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville is the capital, it's in the middle, what have you. Whereas you juxtapose where our hardest hit center is Memphis. Memphis has a unique challenge of having 3 states within literally in their backyard. Arkansas is right across the bridge. There's Mississippi, which is right down the road. And of course, there's Tennessee, where Memphis sits in. So within those complexities, there's those 3 challenges of how do we create a comprehensive plan. Finding health equity is so personal to me. And within this respect, I thought, hey, what is a good way of finding it? To me is finding your tribe. That's number 1. Because we all need someone. You all need to collect a bunch, and you don't need 100 people, 2 to 3 people, 3 to 5, what have you. That health equity is really just a landing point so you can feel good about yourself, so you can see what others are experiencing. You want a group that may be a long-term survivor, short-term survivor, but whatever it may be, that health equity is within that circle of friends that may have been living with it, may be newly diagnosed, but just having a landing spot where you can talk openly and honestly about what is going on. That is health equity. That is really just strength in numbers so you can collectively learn about what is happening. Many times we learn through what? Google, our friends. But this health equity circle will really be, hey, what's happening with your doctor? Hey, what should I prepare? Hey, what medicine you are? That's health equity because that is tangible things that doesn't cost any money. You don't have to, it's not going to be eliminated by the federal government. And most importantly, you get to have that bandwidth to decide what is important for you. Now, many times people say, well, how do I do that? The same way you Google how to do an oil change. You start with one and says, hey, where's my tribe? And you be like, well, million things that come up. Start very small. What do you like to do? Don't let the circle be based on blank. Let it be based on many things that you like. And that's health equity. Really just zeroing in on what drives you so you can have the most robust life. Many times I have learned in the HIV epidemic field, that is the end all. But it is not. HIV is just literally one part of that HIV person's life. They're living with. It is not their first name nor their last name. So just having more deeper circles is supreme health equity. And then most importantly, the second thing is after you find your tribe, find others. Many in the community do not help others. We are one collective. There is not one population against the other, or what have you. That population doesn't get preference or the other. We are all collectively battling one thing to get to 0 HIV infections. Within that respect, while I definitely think your one circle should be small and tight knit, 3 to 5, where you could talk openly and honestly about what's happening. That other circle should be a little more broader, what have you, and it should be community wide. Some people you normally want to talk to. At Southern AIDS Coalition, we pride ourselves on having really strong and robust memberships so people can feel confident and bring their fullness to themselves, but also they can learn from others. So to me, those are 2 strong examples of health equity because it's something that you could do overnight, but most importantly, it does not cost you 1 penny. Unless, of course, you like to donate to Southern AIDS Coalition, where membership is supreme. In regards to storytelling, as someone that has written my story, understands story, I think stories are important. But I also know that stories are very personal. Stories mean well. Stories have weight to them. Stories what happen. It helps reduce stigma tremendously because it shows more identity to the virus, more identity to what is going on. But it is important to note this. Even if you are not storytelling publicly, I hugely recommend that everyone journal because many times I meet people that is doing this work and they have the most profound stories, backgrounds, situations, scenarios, and they are not journaling about it. They're not, talking about it. They're not being, forthright about it because going back to the earlier sentiment, This epidemic is very unique because it is happening in 50 different states at the same time. And the response is completely different, not only in these states, but within each state, so, going back to Nashville and Memphis. So more stories, but also making sure that these stories are not being silenced. And that is literally just going back to those earlier circles of, hey, are you telling these stories? Are people hearing these stories? So you don't have to publish your story, but at least journal, at least get it out there, at least let it be known what is happening. Because more and more, the more that people see us, the more people understand us, and the more people ultimately read about us, the less stigmas, because now people understand the complexities of us. So I think that everything that we do is in tandem towards the greater good, but also recognize your small contribution may just be a journal entry on how you felt during a doctor visit, or 10 years of living with the virus, or Day on the Hill. All of this is living history. All of this is important. But most importantly, the person's experience is so valid and so needed. And if we are not lifting those stories up, or at least hearing them, we are not doing ourselves a service, so we can best move forward with the fullness of what is going on.
So thank you for spending this time with us, and for remembering that the fight for freedom, for dignity, and for health justice is always unfinished. Right now, our representatives in Congress are deciding whether millions of people, these are our neighbors, our families, they're deciding whether or not they'll keep the healthcare that they need. You have power in this moment. Call your House member. Tell them vote no on this dangerous reconciliation package. Because our people deserve care, not cuts, not gaslighting. They deserve security, not fear or uncertainty. Together, we will keep pushing. We will keep fighting, and like those who came before us, we'll win. So thank you for being part of our Freedom Summer.